that's going to impact Parks and Rec over here. No, we're in a vacuum.
Well, let me ask you this: as far as the running it like a business, is there an accounting of all of your debt? I mean,
all the debt numbers are handled by finance currently.
Right.
We don't do anything about those. We just get the numbers. We control nothing with them. They're rolled into city debts. We have nothing to do with any of those numbers.
We pay our debt service out of our funds.
The major difference is when it comes to the budget, you can almost think of us as a completely separate entity in the sense that we're basically billed by the city. Finance says these numbers go from here, we pay for this, just like if you had a third-party contractor, and then we're paying a franchise fee to the city, just like an IPO would.
But the difference is we don't really know what our costs are. I mean, we've never, and I think that this all gets back to what I've been promoting and advocating for years. That is, I mean, we're trying to fix a document, and we really have no big picture vision of what we're trying to accomplish here. I mean, this is what was left to us as a legacy of another administration, rightfully or wrongfully, and we're trying to fix a document and cobble a bunch of terms together, and when in fact what we should do is just take this whole document and say, what do we really want out of this division? And if we go back to that, I'm afraid that the first thing you have to do is rescind the board and go back and say, is this really what we want to do? I mean, and I think as an advisory committee, your expertise and the meetings that you have are beneficial. I mean, they're just the same as when we get guidance from the Planning Commission about property development. That's the kind of information we need to make our decisions. And you probably would get into the numbers and into the policies a lot more than Cheryl, who's not going to be able to have the specificity that you can address those issues. But
or dedicate the time.
Well, that's true. And so that's why I've never been opposed to having an advisory committee out of this board, but it should not. We've already eliminated 3 of your functions, and you've already told us the 4th function, rate making, can't be done without the other 3. So, I mean, I keep coming back to, let's start over. I mean, I'm not trying to take any power away from anybody, but ultimately, if we have the responsibility, and our futures depend on those decisions that we make, we should have the whole responsibility, not piecemeal it back and forth and say this needs to be done this way, and well, now we got to take all the HR function. Let's just start over and see, kind of like we did with goals-based budgeting, what we want out of this utility that's different than any other utility that we own and operate.
The one thing I'll agree with out of all of that is, yes, there needs to be clear-cut decisions and goals for the division, for the department. But other than that, I would disagree, because if you pull the board back, you're going to lose all the current traction that we have and everything that's going forward already. So I wouldn't want to pull anything back just so that we can potentially figure it out in the future. Let things continue on the current debatable status as is for now. And the issues that have been discussed, some of them sound like they're still kind of questionable, because economic development is strategic or tactical, and you brought up the question of how much, is a banner too much, or is it this? Those type of details are what has to be honed out, not create or destroy.
Well, and I would tend to agree, and we're not voting on anything tonight,
Right.
so I mean everything would continue until, but a little bit to Larry's point, and actually I think what Chris was trying to get to as well, is that it seems like we're heading in the direction, based on the conversation, of an advisory board at minimum. And I think Chris was saying, okay, so should that advisory board, as we're talking through this, should it include the other utilities? And I mean, we can debate that, but to me, I think that gives staff the direction to go back and say, okay, we've heard this conversation. EUB is going to function as it is until this actually gets wrapped up and brought back to council for kind of a final decision.
A recommendation.
A recommendation for a decision based on all of this conversation.
Well, and I want to stress, the most important part here is the study of the issues surrounding the utilities.
Right. I agree.
And Mark, you were in that committee. The amount of study that council gave Jim Melvin's departments over the years, before he got here, was not
We did that
befitting.
committee.
Was not befitting the huge financial investment that we have in those utilities. And Tori, you've been going to council meetings for God only knows how long, and you were on planning commission before that. And when was the last time that the planning commission sent something to council that we turned around and said no on? I'm sure it's happened, but
It happened a couple times, but not much.
but it doesn't happen very often. I think we take planning commission recommendations pretty seriously around here. And we ought to, because they do put in a lot of time. So, to Christie's point and to Larry's point, I might dispute the idea that you've been asking for an advisory committee all this time. You wanted to bring it all back under city council, which...
The decision making.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
so...
go back and watch the tape tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe a little earlier in this conversation, but, and actually, I'm not gonna parse,
Okay.
but I think, you've got me, you've got Christie, you've got Larry. Is there anybody else that's on board with the idea that we should be exploring this as a public utility, a Gardner utility commission as opposed to an electric utility board?
I like that idea. I did go to some of the meetings when you guys had the exploratory committee. It seemed like that was the direction we wanted to pursue back then, just as even as an audience member when it did come to council. I would be open to that idea. I think that's a good idea. I think based on the success that the board, the EUB has shown, now there's some little tweaking along the way, sounds like, but they're, for the most part, successful. I think that they just got confused of who was supposed to make which policy or whatever, but we've opened the communication now. So I think we're on the right track, and I think we should use some of the pros of the electric utility board and move those into a board of public utilities.
And not just, well, I do have one question.
Now,
I'm sorry.
but I think what Larry and Christie are talking about is set it up more like a commission, more like...
Right. I think it
Like
should could
planning
still be
commission.
more an advisory committee, but I think that there's
Okay.
also some pros and benefits from the UB that could be transferred over.
Oh, absolutely.
But I like the advisory role of it.
Okay, so let me get this straight. And I think so. Right now, the biggest benefit that I think that the EUB members would say, and I agree with them on this, is that one of the is that it is run as a business. It's run as a business. It's in competition with places like KCP&L. Okay. Those day-to-day decisions, Gardner Energy and the brand Gardner Energy and all the decisions that are made under that entity umbrella, where would those revert to? And would the director be then working for Brian, for example, under Public Works? I'm just interested in knowing, because those are big decisions. Because if you make if you make the Board of Public Utilities into a strictly advisory role, now that entire structure basically has to go somewhere. It doesn't just sit out there in the ether.
Three different directors, or how does that work? I lend myself to Steve. I don't think that is the solution, because
I don't either.
you're striking some pieces of this, just Section 1 itself. And it goes back to what I said earlier. The uniqueness of the EUB and what it has to do with proactive measures doesn't equate to be part of the BPU, where water and wastewater, though they're doing some proactive things, it's not as much land acquisition to gain new customers. It's not economic development where they can change the policies, although there's a different piece of that, and there's some things that cancel, so maybe that's not the best example. But there's some proactiveness that I just don't think lends itself to being part of a BPU with all these other pieces, or equating it to the Planning Commission. Again, that's just to me, completely reactionary board. That is, they aren't going out searching it's brought to them and they work with that, whereas the EUB, I keep going back, they're going out proactively searching ways to operate their business more efficiently, if that's gaining more customers, earning more customers, if that's adjusting their rates to be more competitive in an economic environment, different things. So I'm not certain that is the solution. So although there might be a majority that says 3 is, that's where I stand on
But
it.
Heath, why would you think that and this is what I struggle with.